That really should concern all of us. The Wall Street Journal is now reporting that Microsoft and Amazon have just been given access to your hospital records.
Apocalyptic images coming out of Australia right now.
There are now 6 fires burning at emergency level.
The smoke is so intense and so thick it can be seen from space.
2,000 homes have been destroyed.
6 million hectares of land charred.
A staggering toll on the nation's wildlife.
Strong winds and record heat. This fire season in Australia is being described as catastrophic. And now there's a new threat. Columns of smoke and heat from the flames are causing thunderstorms and lightning that could spread the fires and spark new ones. Threat is high in the states of New South Wales, South Australia, and Victoria. Tens of thousands of people, including tourists, have been told it's too late to leave as out-of-control fires burn nearby. They've been advised to immediately seek shelter.
Some 130 fires are burning right now, scorching more than 14 million acres of land. At least 25 people have been killed and more than 2,000 homes destroyed.
As intense flames still scorch parts of Australia, at least 4 people are missing and at least 24 are dead. New South Wales police charging 24 people for allegedly setting some of these bushfires. An airline passenger spotting pyrocumulus clouds over the weekend, essentially fire-induced thunderstorms. Lightning from those storms starting new fires.
We believe what we saw is a column collapse that spread that fire dramatically in a number of different directions. So it's an incredibly difficult and dangerous season.
More than 14 million acres have burned, fueled in part by Australia's driest and hottest year on record. So when it rained Monday, people in Sydney cheered as the skies opened up. But fire officials say that the rain is actually hampering their ability to backburn. That's when firefighters set fires intentionally to control the progress of the main fire.
Let's start with the backburning. It's so counterintuitive for people to say, I see rain, that has to be good.
It's definitely not enough to extinguish it, but it's just being a real pain in the fact that we can't actually light the fire in front of it. So it is a little bit of a problem at the moment.
One of the biggest factors in the epic fire season that still has at least 2 months to go, the drought, driven by something called the Indian Ocean Dipole, or IOD. It's a fluctuation of sea surface temperatures in the Indian Ocean. And in its positive phase, the westerly winds that would typically bring rain weaken, and sometimes easterly winds form. That takes all the warm water and rain-inducing storms away from Australia.
Many areas now haven't seen, good rains for almost 2 years.
Tens of thousands have been evacuated, but for some, escaping the inferno has not been easy.
We had 3 different attempts for air evac that failed because of too much smoke.
Megan Wegg and her family were forced to seek refuge in a movie theater while waiting for rescue.
There was actually ash falling from the vent.
A helicopter finally managing to get in and get the family out to safety.
You know how they say you never know what you got till it's gone? The air is definitely something I'm really appreciating right now, fresh air.
Think about climate change and wildlife, they probably think about polar bears and maybe the Great Barrier Reef. Well, we can add koalas to them now.
As many as 30% of koalas in the country's New South Wales region may have been killed
as the fires continue to ravage and destroy their habitat.
The reality is that these fires are not normal. We're in a war zone.
So I know that there's been, loss of human life, definitely loss of property here, but what impact has this fire had, or this fire season had on wildlife in Australia?
Well over 1 billion animals are thought to have died or will soon die in the weeks and months ahead because of the current fires. That's 1 billion, and we've never had a toll like that on our wildlife. But it seems that every few days the statistics get worse. I don't know where it will end by the end of this fire season.
Are there specific species that are particularly being hard hit by this?
Many animals cannot flee these big fires. Either they can't fly, they can't move quickly, they can't burrow, they burn to death. Particularly because Australia has bulldozed half of our forests. It's hard for wildlife to flee somewhere else. And that's why you find a lot of animals, including koalas, are wandering into people's backyards, into the streets, looking for some habitat to survive in. When they panic, they climb up a tree. And it works when the fires low down, but it's almost a death sentence when the fire consumes. It's a crown fire, a canopy fire. People have talked about flames up to 200 feet in the air. That's 70 metres. I mean, that is, our trees generally don't grow that big, so any wildlife or birds or lizards that go to the top of the trees to escape a normal fire, they're sitting ducks, really.
So I've seen a lot of particularly hard to watch videos of koalas, basically charred from the fire. Like, are they going to go extinct after this? What's the status of the koala now, and what's going to happen to them?
No, we're not talking about general records. We're talking about identifiable hospital records. This is crucial but controversial. It's a move to try and maybe marry big tech with healthcare data.
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head when you say this is just the latest move in marrying big tech with medical data. These hospitals are kind of like data mines, right? Lots of data in there. And we're talking about hospitals making deals with companies like IBM, Google, Amazon, Microsoft. One example is Providence. This is a hospital system that hosts the data from over 20 million patient visits per year. They just made a deal with Bill Gates' Microsoft to use medical records to develop cancer algorithms, which of course sounds like a very noble goal. But even Providence admits that the doctor's notes that are being used are not being stripped of those personally identifiable data points before being handed over to Microsoft. And as an interesting point, Providence St. Joseph's, both their CIO and their CFO, both were executives at Microsoft before their positions at Providence. Now, we're also talking about companies like IBM, Amazon, Google that are allowing these hospitals to share personally identifiable information with them. And like you said, this story really reflects the latest example of tech corporations obtaining our medical data. And it's just the latest example. Here are some earlier examples. We have Google and their connection to the largest DNA database on Earth through its connection with 23andMe. This is what we reported on last week, right? This is through its co-founder, Sergey Brin. And its other co-founder, interestingly enough, Larry Page, is actually working to develop a universal flu vaccine. So you see the fruits of this medical data really, coming to fruition. And Microsoft, believe it or not, is also in the business of obtaining medical and biological information. In fact, they want your blood.
Mosquitoes are the ultimate field biologists, taking blood samples from every animal they bite. Microsoft and its partners are using smart traps to capture mosquitoes and study the DNA they collect. With the cloud, what used to take 30 days now takes 12 hours.
Now to something a little bit more fun. Planning a trip can always be welcome, but finding the best deal can be a real pain. And a new report in the New York Times says it's a race between you and the machine. Your own computer is fighting you. Now, according to this report, travel companies are using hyperdynamic pricing. And this means artificial intelligence can go in and change the price of flights after scanning the web. It wasn't in your mind that was actually happening if you've ever planned a trip online. So for trends, news, weather, and even social media for information which could affect demand. Now, airfare prediction app Hopper says the average price of a domestic flight can change up to 17 times in just 2 days.
A disagreement between the Commerce Department and the Department of Defense when it comes to Huawei. About 7 months ago, the Commerce Department put the Chinese telecom giant on a trade blacklist, citing unsubstantiated national security concerns, 86ing American companies from selling their parts to Huawei too. But the DoD says not so fast and are pushing to allow trade to at least flow outbound to China, fearing a full ban might greatly disrupt American commerce.
It's been called a technological Cold War over the future of 5G. The US has been piling pressure on the UK and other allies not to use Chinese communications company Huawei over alleged spying risks. On Monday, US officials issued the British government with a dossier of dangers. The debate risks dividing the so-called Five Eyes, an intelligence alliance between the US, UK, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. Washington's warned it would reassess sharing information with the UK's intelligence services if Britain gives Huawei the go-ahead. The government will give a final decision later in January. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said Huawei's critics need to suggest other options.
If people oppose one brand or another, then they have to tell us which is what's the alternative, right? On the other hand, let's be clear. I don't want, as the UK Prime Minister, to put in any infrastructure that is going to prejudice our national security.
And think about that, right? Because essentially what we've been told now for months is that Huawei is a national security concern, that the biggest security concern is that the Chinese are using this tech to backdoor and to pull data and pull information. That's why the Pentagon was all out told you cannot have any Huawei devices within the Pentagon, right? Because it's a huge national security concern. Because Boris Johnson over in the UK is being told if you work with Huawei on your 5G development, you can't even be part of the Five Eyes anymore because the Chinese will have access to all of the intelligence sharing between the United States and Canada, New Zealand and Australia and the United States. So here's what's happening is now suddenly the Pentagon turns around and says, so here's the problem, guys. If we cut off Huawei completely, we're going to harm U.S. companies. But it's the Commerce Department, it's the Treasury Departments are the ones who are working to say, no, Huawei can't sell here. We can't work with their company at all. Which tells you that this is, as I've been saying now for as long as we've been covering this story, it's entirely political. It has nothing to do with national security concerns. It has nothing to do with Chinese spying. It has everything to do with the Trump administration wanting leverage over the Chinese during the trade war and to get a leg up on 5G.
There are big companies like Nokia and Ericsson who are well established. In fairness, they haven't always kept up with the pace of speed with Huawei in terms of the price of the equipment, the quality of the equipment and the size of the equipment. We've also got Samsung emerging, but I think the best solution really for the network operators is to have a mixed base of suppliers.
But what about in the business sense? Since this push by the Pentagon to ease up on any sort of sales ban, I guess the next question ought to be, what place is it for the Department of Defense to advocate for business? Doesn't it just reveal how deeply intertwined the DoD is really with contractors?
Yeah, it does reveal that, but it also demonstrates as well the fact that there isn't these actual points being made from logical, factual places. It's like everyone has a hand in this and everyone's got an opinion and none of it's based in fact. Look, if you take a look at what's happening with Huawei right now, the idea in the beginning was we're going to harm Huawei by denying them access to US manufacturing. We're going to deny them access to companies like Google and the Android operating system. And what has happened instead, and this is something else that you and I have talked about at length, and something that I had predicted, which is that Huawei would be stronger. Now, over in Davos this past week, the president and CEO of Huawei gave a speech specifically about technology. And one of the things he mentioned is that the United States, he said, has made Huawei so much stronger than they used to be because they are no longer dependent on US technology. They're no longer dependent on Google. They've created their own operating system. They're not using the Android system anymore. And so essentially what you've done is you've starved them for a little while, but because they had such large reservoirs of cash and they were smart about their business, they have now been able to bypass. class. Meanwhile, companies like Texas Instruments are having to lay off workers across the United States.
It's just about faster data on our mobile phones. It's about immersive education. It's about self-driving cars. It's about smarter cities. The list goes on. If you believe the hype, we'll all eventually simply need 5G. But it requires a vast amount of new infrastructure, and that comes at a price.
Huawei claims its equipment is cheaper than its competitors and uses less energy, giving it a potential edge in the developing world. Huawei signed 5G contracts in more than 30 countries, from Russia to Iceland, Switzerland to South Africa. The UK's proposed some restrictions on Huawei technology. Germany and France say they'll increase cybersecurity measures. Several countries are still on the fence about possible bans, but given the potential cost to consumers, the technological tussle may be one on price rather than politics.